Harrop. This was in honor of a guest from Egypt who had just arrived in the Hadramaut, and included dances and also recitations by Sheikh Al-Kaf's court poet. In Shibam, I enjoyed the hospitality of my old friend Hussein Abu Bakr. But whenever I started talking about my travel plans, he would shake his head and declare that the project was not feasible. Several days had already gone by and I was at a complete loss, almost ready to give up hope, because the areas I had to cross on the way to Sana'a were well known for the hostility of their inhabitants towards anyone with a white skin. It was with great joy that I heard of the arrival of a caravan from Harrop. I went to the market and found there a little man with an impish face, a Bedouin. I took him along to my hosts, and after lengthy negotiations, we managed to persuade him to take me with him to Harrop. But only on the condition that I paid him the, for those days, enormous sum of 150 thalers. But it didn't worry me. Now at least the money couldn't be stolen by robbers. The camel that was to take me to Sana'a was loaded up with all my baggage. 2 crates of photographic material, my recording equipment, a carpet, a blanket, some coffee, tea, biscuits, and a few tins of fruit. This was mainly what I lived on during the 3 weeks we took to cross the desert. The camels were loaded at the crack of dawn, encouraged by the Bedouins with their weird camel songs. Then everything fell quiet, and the caravan snaked silently through the desert. Every day we traveled for 10 to 12 hours. It was an extremely strenuous journey. But I had the satisfaction of being able to do it. I was the first European permitted to cross the southern part of the great Arabian desert, Rub al-Khali. Only rarely did we find protection from the glaring sun to consume the usual meal, laham, rotting shark meat with rice. Sometimes we were lucky enough to encounter Bedouin shepherds, and for 5 or 6 thaler we bought a sheep. After the animal had been slaughtered, the joints were roasted and generally devoured still half raw. The desert makes such a strong impression on the traveler that it's hard to express one's feelings in words. One had a sense of the secret life that fills these seemingly dead wastes. It wasn't something one's outward senses could perceive, yet it pervaded all one's thoughts and feelings, making one realize why the Arabs and other desert dwellers populate this landscape that's so devoid of humans with unearthly beings. Pliny mentions Shapwa, the great capital of the Sabaean and Lihanite Empire that played an extremely important role in ancient times. Shabwa was the center of the incense trade. All the incense from South Arabia that was delivered by caravan to the Near East, to Rome, Greece and Egypt, passed through Shabwa, where high tolls were levied on it. We know this city existed. We know that it was destroyed in antiquity. We know where its ruins lie. We also know that a Bedouin tribe settled among them, and that foreigners, travelers and adventurers attempted to reach these ruins. The Bisquam, for instance, failed to enter the city. He came with a large caravan loaded with gifts for the Bedouin, but had to beat a rapid retreat. Then 2 British pilots tried to get in, having landed nearby. They were captured and killed, and their plane was burnt. I was the first European to succeed in visiting the ruins.
From an archaeological point of view, Shabwa and Marib are the most interesting cities in the whole of the Yemen. Marib was once the capital of the Sabaean kingdom, which endured for over 14 centuries. The first mention of it is in the Old Testament description of the visit of Bilqis, the Queen of Sheba, or Saba, to King Solomon. It was evidently very important at the time for these powerful rulers to be on friendly relations, since they separately controlled the southern and northern halves of the incense route. The wealth and prosperity of the Sabaean kingdom largely depended on taxes from the caravans that were obliged to pass through it with their valuable cargoes. The desert ruins are the remains of a Sabaean temple built in the 4th century BC. In Marib, as early as the 8th century BC, a huge dam had been built, over 600 meters long, which was constantly enlarged over the course of several centuries until it finally reached a height of 16 meters in the middle. It was an exceptional construction for the times, a masterpiece of ancient engineering, and it provided irrigation for the fields and water supplies for a population of 300,000. The decline of the kingdom of Saba and the resulting neglect of this ingenious dam led to disastrous floods, and it finally collapsed in the year 542 BC. The incense trade had long come to an end, and after the collapse of the dam, the whole area became a no-man's land. In ancient Marib, stones and pillars of old monuments with inscriptions from the Sabaean period are still to be found. During the civil war in the 60s, the Egyptian forces made Marib their base for military operations. The city suffered from heavy assaults and fighting and was badly bombed and destroyed.
I naturally had to reckon with border problems while I was crossing southwestern Arabia. When I arrived at the border between no man's land and the Kingdom of Yemen, I thought if they wouldn't let me through, they could always send me back. And then I'd simply return via the Hadramaut. But that's not what happened. I came to the border in Harrop and was kindly received by the governor, who sent an escort of soldiers to meet me. I was given a reception feast. Then came the hour of cut at about 2 p.m, and I wanted to move on, but was told that it wasn't that simple. The imam would have to be asked, the king of Yemen, and my passport sent to Sana'a. They took my passport and gave it to a courier. And since the journey to Sana'a took 2 weeks, I now had plenty of time in hand. I was the prisoner of the governor of Harrop. I didn't stay in a palace, but was locked up in the town jail, a watchtower in which there were several prisoners, including a murderer in chains. I was given a particularly good room up in the 3rd story, with firing slits and small windows. I also had access to the upper platform of the tower where it was nice and cool at night, so I could put up my camp bed there and had a good view of the whole landscape. My prison was a hospital too, and, oddly enough, also a rest and recreation place for the officers of the garrison. I had a few medicaments with me, with which I could now and then help a patient. Word had got round very fast, and now, whenever I opened my door in the morning, I found the passage full of waiting patients. After a week, I was given permission to go for walks in the town, but only in the company of 2 heavily armed soldiers. I was a prisoner, but I was well treated and well fed. And at the hour of cut, at about 2 in the afternoon, I was allowed into the tower courtyard, where the governor's office was, to enjoy a pleasant hour.
Des Gouverneurs, und da fand nun eine gemütliche Katzstunde statt. Es war der Gouverneur dort.
The governor was there with his bodyguard, and the prisoners were brought out, including those with chains on their feet. One was chained to a ring, but this was opened and he was brought out for the hour of cut.
Dann kam nun also die Stunde des Cut.
Cut is a plant with narcotic leaves.
Ein Narkotikum darstellen.
The cat plant, Catha edulis, from which cat is extracted, is a small bush with juicy light green leaves. It's cultivated mainly in the mountainous regions of Upper Yemen. Tradition has it that cat was discovered thanks to a goat. A herdsman noticed that one of his goats often danced around for no reason and did funny leaps. On investigation, he discovered that his goat always became merry when it had had a good meal from the leaves of a rather prickly plant. He reported this discovery to a poet, who, reluctant to keep this knowledge to himself, wrote the most splendid verses to the emerald leaves of the heavenly weed. And that's how the enjoyment of cat began in the Yemen, possibly more than 400 years ago. The tender twigs are carefully cut off, bundled in juicy banana leaves or straw, often also in plastic, and tied up firmly so that they stay fresh. And this is how they're sold. Naturally, there are fine gradations in taste and quality, as with wine or tobacco. The leaves are stripped from the stem, placed in the mouth and chewed. This takes quite a while, and everyone sits around with bulging cheeks. Cat undoubtedly has both a stimulating and a calming effect. But cat consumption over a long period is detrimental to health. All the same, the Yemenites maintain that they can't do good business without their cat.
From the window of my prison, I could sometimes hear the rattle of gunfire and the sound of soldiers singing. These soldiers' songs served to calm the people of the town and its environs, and show them they could sleep soundly and undisturbed under the watchful protection of the king's troops. The Yemenites used to believe that just singing these songs was enough to put the enemy to flight. Whenever some governor was out and about with an escort, these songs could be heard. I recorded these soldiers' songs. A typical one is the samel. A samel always starts with a falling fourth or fifth, and then the melody begins. I'll show you a typical samel melody.